Hi.
Hi there, welcome back to English for Specific Purposes at the B2 level. We are your hosts, I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I'm Miss Tatia. მოგესალმებით, კეთილი იყოს თქვენი დაბრუნება ჩვენს ტელესკოლაში. მე თათია ვარ, ეს კი ტერილია. ჩვენი დღევანდელი გაკვეთილის თემა კი ავიაცია. Mr. Daryl, we're going to talk about aviation today, a completely different topic, right?
Something in the sky.
Yes. But before we move on to the lesson, I think that we have to look at our agenda. What's on our agenda today, Mr. Daryl?
Well, we'll have our usual discussion. From there, we'll move on to some of the vocabulary lists that we need for the reading text later on. And then we'll look at some grammar and then close it off with some homework.
Nice. Seems very interesting. გაკვეთილს როგორც ყოველთვის შესწავლით დავიწყებთ, შემდეგ შევისწავლით ახალ სიტყვებს, შემდეგ წავიკითხავთ საინტერესო ტექსტს ავიაციასთან დაკავშირებით. ამას მოყვება გრამატიკა, შემდეგ შევაჯამებთ გაკვეთილს და დავასრულებთ საშინაო დავალებით. Let's get started. As we are going to talk about aviation today, Mr. Daryl, I would like to ask you, do you know when the first airplane was ever invented or flown?
Actually, I do know that. It was in 1903.
Really?
By two brothers, the
Wright brothers.
Yeah.
Oh, I have also read the information about it. Okay, and just was it successful? I mean, the first flight, the maiden flight, was it successful?
Yeah, it was successful. The first flight, quite short, but from there they would just build and build and build until we could cross the entire planet.
Yes, and now we have sophisticated airplanes,
technology and equipment.
Yes, and I would like to ask you, how do you feel when you're flying? So do you feel safe?
I've always loved flying, always, from childhood. But I admit that recently I start to think a bit more when I'm on a plane.
Yes, what might go wrong, right?
Could that go wrong? Could that go wrong?
And you listen to every sound there, right?
Not every sound, but yeah, I start wondering more.
Yeah, I also feel quite stressed when I'm flying, you know. I can't say that I'm relaxed and I feel happy there, but still it's not a phobia for me.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on and as we have promised, let's introduce some words connected with aviation. And the first word we have is runway. Runway is a noun and in Georgian it means asapren zoli biliki. Okay, so how would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
It's a long stretch of hard surface where planes can land and take off.
Okay, so runway, it's a noun and in Georgian it's translated as asapren zoli biliki. And here we have an example. The plane apparently overshot the runway after landing.
That's not good.
Not good, right. And what is the next word we have, Mr. Daryl?
Cockpit.
Cockpit. Cockpit is a noun and in Georgian it's translated as pilotis kabina. This is the place where pilot sits, right?
And not just pilots, it can be for small race cars as well. They call it the cockpit, the place where the driver or the pilot sits.
Oh, right. Cockpit. It's a noun and in Georgian it's translated as pilotis kabina. And I will provide an example. Only the stewardess can go from the cabin to the cockpit.
Safer that way.
Yes, the next word we have is cabin crew. Cabin crew is a noun and in Georgian it's translated as ekipaji. So is this the people who are on the plane?
And it's nice when they have a kind and a gentle crew. Yeah, these are the people that serve you drinks, food, take care of problems, look into things that you might have, concerns that you might have.
Okay, so cabin crew is a noun and in Georgian it's translated as ekipaj. And here's an example. A member of the cabin crew demonstrated the safety procedures. They usually demonstrate, it's a common thing, right?
They always do, yeah.
They always do it. And what is the next word, Mr. Daryl?
Turbulence. Turbulence.
Turbulence is a noun and in Georgian we translate it as turbulentoba, which is not a good thing. A lot of people are just really scared when the airplane gets in turbulence.
Into turbulence, yeah. It's that period of time, hopefully something you'll never experience, but when a plane starts hitting a uneven or rough patch of air.
Okay. Turbulence, it's a noun and in Georgian it's translated as ტურბულენტობა. And an example here, the plane ran into some turbulence over the Atlantic. Oh, scary thing,
Difficult place.
Okay, and the next word we have is landing. Landing is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as მიწაზე დაშვება, დაფრენა. Landing. So, how would you define that word, Mr. Darren?
Well, it's the fact of, or the activity of a plane coming back down to ground.
Which is very good feeling, right? When you know that your plane has landed safely.
I've often noticed that the passengers on a plane will start to clap
Yes.
as soon as they land.
As soon as the plane lands. So landing, it's a noun, and in Georgian we translate it as მიწაზე დაშვება, დაფრენა. And I will provide an example. The plane had to make a forced landing because one of the engines cut out. Oh, this is not good when you have this forced landing. Okay?
No. Seems like all of our examples were kind of on the negative end.
Yes. Okay. And I think that we have finished with the set of vocabulary and it's time to practice. We will see sentences on the screen and we have to choose the right word to complete the sentences, right?
Let's look at the first sentence. Something, you'll have to choose the correct word, have been giving evidence at the M1 air crash inquiry.
Okay, if they have to give some kind of evidence, it means that they were there when the crash happened, okay, when airplane crashed. So it must be cabin crew. So cabin crew have been giving evidence at the M1 air crash inquiry.
Well done.
Okay, the next one for you. So there is a special area at the airport where you can view aircraft taking off and
its opposite, landing.
Landing, you are right. So the sentence sounds the following way. There's a special area at the airport where you can view aircraft taking off and landing.
Here's yours, Ms. Tatia.
Yes, I'm ready.
Our plane has lifted off the something and is now airborne.
Okay, so I know the word for sure, and it must be runway. And the sentence would sound the following way. Our plane has lifted off the runway and is now airborne.
Very good.
Planes usually take off the or lift off the runway. Yeah.
That's right. They have to. Yeah.
And the next one for you.
Something caused the plane to turn over.
Okay, so I know it for sure that the answer is turbulence, because usually turbulence causes the plane to turn over if it is strong turbulence, right?
Very strong, yeah.
Okay, so the sentence sounds the following way. The turbulence caused the plane to turn over. Okay, and the next one for you. In flight, for instance, the engine tended to spray oil on the windshield of the
cockpit. It has to be the cockpit.
Yes.
But that sounds like a dangerous situation.
Yeah, really dangerous situation. Okay, and I think that we have finished with the first set of vocabulary. It's time to move to reading. But before we read a text, we need to discuss some things and also learn some words, okay? Today our text is about the future of planes, so I would like you to imagine a little bit. What do you think? What will the future planes look like?
Well, I guess I'm not much of an engineer, but I'd imagine that future planes will look like spaceships. I mean, they can go into space. You can take off from your mansion, go into space, and then come back.
And then come back. So visit Mars and then come back, right? Definitely they are going to change. Of course, they're not going to stay the same as they are now, but just I cannot say exactly what they will look like. Okay, let's read and find out. But before we read a text, we have to learn some words.
That's right.
Okay, let's look at the first word we have, and the first word we have is prototype. Prototype is a noun, and in Georgian we translate it as prototype. Can you give us more details about the word, Mr. Darryl?
Prototype is a first example of something. When you're trying to invent something, when you're trying to do something new, the first concrete example you come up with is your prototype, and then you can test it and you can do all sorts of things. If it works, great, that's the final product. If it doesn't work, you go back and you change it.
Tests are done on prototypes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So prototype is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as prototype. And I will provide an example. The engineers tested the prototype of a new plane.
Excellent.
What is our next word, Mr. Daryl?
Bunk. Bunk.
Bunk. Bunk is a noun, and in Georgian it is კედელზე მიმაგრებული საწოლი. It's usually on the planes, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the trains too.
Trains, definitely, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've slept on the bunk in a train.
Really?
Sure,
It's not comfortable, I think.
I can sleep anywhere. No
Okay.
problem.
Well, bunk. So can you define the word, Mr. Daryl?
It's a narrow bed, usually in a small space and attached to the wall, like in a train or in a plane.
Okay. Bunk is a noun, and in Georgian it is კედელზე მიმაგრებული საწოლი. For example, can I sleep in the top bunk?
Yes, there's a thing called bunk beds as well, when you have the double level.
Usually siblings have got bunk beds.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next word we have is long haul. Long haul is an adjective, and in Georgian it is shori magistraluri. Okay, so how would you define that word, Mr.
Traveling for long distances, you're in it for the long haul.
Okay, so long haul, an adjective, and in Georgian it is shori, so magistraluri. And here's an example. UK domestic and long haul flights offsets lower growth in European air travel. So domestic is like short haul, maybe.
Local.
And on short distances, right?
Yeah.
And long haul is just when, for example, if you fly from here to the United States, it will be a long haul flight, right?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So let's go on. And what is the next word, Mr. Daryl?
It's a collocation, maiden flight. Maiden flight.
Maiden flight is a collocation, and in Georgian it is პირველი ფრენა, maiden flight. How would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
It's the first flight, the first journey, the first travel out from some place.
Okay, maiden flight, პირველი ფრენა. And an example here, the first hydrogen-powered airplane will make its maiden flight this year. So, I mean, the first flight will be made this year.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next word we have is fuselage. It's a noun, and in Georgian it's defined as ფუზელაჟი, გლაიდერის ტანი, რომელზეც ფრთებია მიმაგრებული. Fuselage.
The fuselage, well, it's the main body of the aircraft, like the part that people can sit in and so on.
Okay, so fuselage, it's a noun, and in Georgian it is ფუზელაჟი, გლაიდერის ტანი, რომელზეც ფრთებია მიმაგრებული. And here we have an example. A close inspection revealed minute cracks in the aircraft's fuselage and wings. Okay, and what is the next word, Mr. Daryl?
Slanted. It's an adjective and it's slanted.
Slanted is an adjective, and in Georgian it is დახრილი, დაქანებული. So how would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
Anything that's kind of sloping in one direction, it's slanted.
Okay, slanted. In Georgian it means დახრილი, დაქანებული. And an example here, slanted bunk bed is not comfortable to sleep.
No, it'd fall off the bed.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that we have finished with the words, and it's time to read a text.
Okay.
And we're going to read a text about the future shape of the airplanes.
Very interesting.
It's very interesting, right? Okay. The model plane that might be the future of flying. There have been big aircraft advances since flying began. Jet engines, lighter materials, computerized control systems. But the shape of the planes has stayed the same. Fuselage, 2 wings and a tail. Aviation engineers have long seen the heavy fuselage as a nuisance. What if the passengers and cargo could be housed in a wing? The flying wing might look futuristic, but the idea is nothing new. Possibly the first flying wing was designed and flown by Czech aviation pioneer Igor Etrich in 1990, although he had to add a tail to keep it stable. Later, engineers have been trying to build a passenger flying wing. KLM and the Delft University of Technology, supported by Airbus, have created a prototype called the Flying V, a 3-meter wide scale model of which made its pilotless first flight at an air base in Germany in July.
So they're really experimenting with the shapes and sizes of these planes now.
Yeah.
The aircraft's creators presented the results this month with Roelof Vos, leader of the project, and a Delft assistant professor, calling it the most revolutionary change in aviation since the introduction of the jet aircraft. The Flying V, as its name suggests, is really 2 wings, splaying out V-shaped from a pointed nose. Apart from the environmental benefits, of which more below, the designers are excited about the possibilities for passengers. The Flying V team says the plane could feature economy bunk beds, but a more important advantage of the slanted cabin wall is that the seats could be staggered rather than in rows, so that even in economy, people would not share armrests with their neighbors. The Flying V is a future long-haul plane carrying up to 360 passengers. The model's maiden flight, while largely successful, was not perfect. The plane's center of gravity turned out to be too far back. It rolled and yawed and landed awkwardly, breaking its nose gear. All these problems are correctable, Vos said.
Yeah, I think that the plane should go through a lot of testing until they are successful, right?
Would you sit in a plane that had not been tested?
Of course, no. Okay. More important is whether the gains would be worth it. The Flying V would use 20% less fuel than today's most advanced long-haul planes, which doesn't sound much in an age when many oppose flying altogether. But Vos say that's only the fuel saving from a different airframe. It doesn't take into account improvements in materials and engines or the use of different fuel, while he doesn't envisage the Flying V ever being electric. He suggests it may be possible one day for it to fly on hydrogen. When could a plane like this enter service? In my personal view, 2040, Vos told me. Richard Walls, NASA's Strategic Technical Advisor or Advanced Aircraft, also said wing body planes could be rolling off the production line in the late 2030s. A long way off, but the pause in our flying is not a bad time to think about a more advanced and environmentally improved way of doing it.
So 2040.
So in 2040 we might see flying wings or just planes of different shape.
Since my sort of fear of flying has been increasing, I don't know, maybe by 2040 I'll want to just stay on land.
Yes, and you will never travel by plane, right? Okay, now it's time to check how well we remember the text or how well we have understood the text. So we will see the statements and we have to decide whether the statements are true or false. The first flying wing was designed by British aviation pioneer and it had no tail.
No, it couldn't have been a British person. I don't remember that from the text, so I'm going to say it's false.
And yes, you are right, it's false. Because we read, possibly the first flying wing was designed and flown by Czech aviation pioneer Igor Etrich in 1990, although he had to add a tail to keep it stable, so it was not without tail. Okay.
Here's your sentence, Ms. Tatya. The Flying V is more comfortable for passengers.
I think it's true. Yes,
Let's
because
check.
I remember that we read, apart from the environmental benefits, of which more below, the designers are excited about the possibilities for passengers.
It was true then.
Yeah, okay. And the next one for you, Mr. Daryl. The Flying V has some environmental benefits. Do you remember we read about benefits?
That's right, I do remember that, and I think this is true.
And you are right, Mr. Daryl. We read the Flying V would use 20% less fuel than today's most advanced long-haul plane. So it's good. It's environmentally it will be environmentally friendly, right?
That's, I think, the reason why they should develop things in the first place, to get more environmentally friendly, to get more efficient, to get more productive.
Yeah, you're right.
Here's yours.
Yes.
Planes like this can enter service next year.
Oh no, definitely no.
Too
We
soon.
talked about 2040 or something like
30s,
that.
40s.
So not next year, definitely. So the statement is definitely false, because I remember we read wing body planes could be rolling off the production line in the late 2030s. Okay, so I think that we have finished with the reading part, and it's time for grammar. What is the topic of today's grammar, Mr. Darrell?
Well, continue to speak of the future. We're going to be talking about the future perfect simple.
Okay, so future perfect. So we are talking about future. Some actions will be finished by some specific time in future. Okay. Use the future perfect to talk about events and accomplishments that will happen by or before a point in the future. The future perfect is often used with time expressions with by and before. Use the future perfect when the exact time of the future event is not known or not important. If there is a specific time, use the future simple or future continuous.
Good advice. Here's the form that you'll have to follow. Use will plus have plus past participle. Here's an example. The world population will have reached 10 billion by the year 2050. Here's another example. The engineers will have developed a new model of planes by 2040. And here's a third example, just to make it clear, they won't have completed the project by next year.
Okay, so we have prepositions by everywhere here. By the year 2050, it will happen before that time, okay? That's why we use here future perfect, right?
Correct.
Okay, if we had the exact time in future, for example, next year, next week, in 2050, then we would have used here future simple or future continuous if it is progressive action, okay? Now let's check how well we can cope with this tense. Here we have sentences and we have verbs in brackets, and we have to put the verbs in the correct form, either future perfect or maybe future simple sometimes. Okay, so the first sentence: by 2050 people, then there is a gap, to Mars and back at least once. We don't have specific time here.
No, and you've got the by as well. By 2050, as you mentioned earlier. So the answer should be, by 2050 people will have traveled to Mars and back at least once.
Absolutely right, Mr. Darrell. Now it's my turn to try.
Here's your sentence. More people, and now you have to put the verb into the space, and the verb is travel. More people by plane in the future.
So as far as I have in the future here, it's kind of exact time, and I would use here future simple. So I would say, more people will travel by plane in the future.
Very, very good.
Just a prediction about future.
Yeah.
Okay, now for you. The government, then there is a gap, a new report on global warming next week. And the verb we have to use is release.
There's a big clue in the sentence, next week.
Exact time in the future.
And it's gonna have to be future simple. The government will release a new report on global warming next week.
Absolutely right, Mr. Darrell. And it's my turn now.
A group of scientists projects that the number of air travelers, and here you have a space, by the year 2100.
Oh, and the verb is decrease, as I can see. Okay, so I have a clue here. Preposition by that time, something will have finished. So I would use here future perfect, and I would say the sentence the following way. A group of scientists projects that the number of air travelers will have decreased by the year 2100.
Excellent, well done.
Okay, and I think that we have finished with the lesson, and it's time to wrap it up.
Ms. Lat, you remember we started with an introduction, we went on to a vocabulary list.
Yes.
It was very important.
And I remember all the words we studied.
That's exactly what I hope the audience will remember as well.
Yes.
We had a reading on the design of a new plane, and we looked at grammar, specifically future perfect simple.
Okay, very useful tips in grammar. And now what about homework?
Yes, we'd like you to write a paragraph describing what the design of planes and transportation might be like in the future.
Very interesting. So people can use their imagination and write how they imagine.
This is a bit more of a creative exercise.
Yes.
We often give more sort of real world based things, but here use your imagination.
Yes.
And use the tense as well, future perfect,
Yes.
simple or future simple.
Yeah, yes. Okay, and where can the homework be uploaded, Mr. Gerald?
Please send it to the address you see on the screen right now. As well, you can find the sample answer right there.
It's very useful and helpful. You are very helpful. Okay, and I think that we have to say goodbye to the audience and wait for the next lesson.
It's time for us to take off from this lesson and
move to something different.
Land on another topic another time.
Okay, so stay with us and keep on learning.
Until next week, goodbye.
Bye.